the Beyond Sleep Training podcast, a podcast dedicated to sharing real tales of how people have managed sleep in their family outside of sleep training culture. Because sleep looks different with a baby in the house, and because every family is different, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to take. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is being recorded, the Kalkadoon people. I pay my respects to the elders of this nation and the many other nations our guests reside in from the past, present and emerging. We honour Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, water and seas, as well as their rich contributions to society, including the birthing and nurturing of children. All right. And welcome back to the Beyond Sleep Training podcast. I'm your host, Carly Grubb, and I've got the wonderful Elise McMahon back with me for another episode. I think it was back in episode 4. We talked to Elise and we learned a little bit about what life was like having a baby in Hong Kong away from your home culture and finding your feet as a parent, not really having any clue what to expect from having life with a baby in the house. And I think that's pretty much where we left things off, Elise. What would you say as your baby got older, how did sleep evolve in your house?
Not in a way that people would say was a positive experience.
Would you say it's a positive experience though?
I think it was. I think so much of society, and my husband and I look at movies and shows all the time and constantly ask, where is the baby? And who's looking after them? And why are they perfectly fine being handed over to a complete stranger when they lost their mum at, all those movies that have all this trauma, and then the baby's just like super chill and perfectly fine being handed around to strangers. And you think, that's not how it
No.
went for
I've
me.
had those thoughts too, yeah.
So I think when we left off, I had tried putting down, picking up, and then decided that was the end of my sleep training journey because it didn't fit my daughter, didn't make me feel comfortable. And I think my internal voice screams loud enough and usually comes out on the outside as well for me to listen to it because I had been so far from other people telling me what worked for them or what they were doing, and I had no idea, and I was in a culture where there were so many different voices that it sort of led me to listen to my internal one a little bit more than I think I would have if I was completely comfortable listening to everybody around me and they all mirrored my same values before I had her. So I think for me we worked out that she, like me, and it is genetic, probably has celiac disease. So we stopped. Well, we never gave her wheat because she didn't get it through my breast milk because I can't have it, and we just never introduced it. And since then, she has been glutened by some seaweed that had teriyaki sauce on it, and we didn't realise it had a sauce, and she definitely had a huge reaction to that. And she's also allergic to eggs. She breaks out in a rash and has a horrible night's sleep, and eggs were something that I relied on heavily when my husband was away on trips. For dinner, just whack an egg on toast and you're sorted, and it made things horribly, horribly worse. And I wasn't listening to myself then because why would somebody be allergic to eggs? And it took a really long time to eventually listen and stop giving it to her, and everything got just a little bit better. And then she had a shocking time with teeth, just a lot of pain, very little sleep. But then we moved houses when she was 1 into a new apartment, and our previous apartment had double glazed windows, so the road noise was a bit less, even though we were closer to the road. And now we're further, but the road noise is more for some reason. And she developed a fear of the bedroom. And so often she if she would not be put to sleep in the bedroom, even though we had floor beds covering the entire surface of the floor, which is not hard to do in Hong Kong. She wouldn't be put to sleep in the bedroom. It had to be out in the lounge room, and then we'd carry her in. And then at one point there, when she was getting her molars and her fears, her nighttime fears were at the worst, which was about 15 months. Every time she woke up, which was often, she'd have to be resettled on the couch and brought back into the room. And unbeknownst to me, I had postnatal depression at this point, and I was exhausted, and hubby was travelling, and I was in a new part of the city, and so I didn't have a lot of friends. But the complex we moved into had a playroom. And so I would get through the day taking her down there, taking her to the park, trying to reach out to anybody that I could to get me through. And there was no way to fix anything in any sort of gentle way. And so for me, it became, I've developed this resolute understanding that at some point we would find out why she was afraid of the bedroom, and at some point her teeth would come through, and then it would all be okay. And I just existed on that hope for about a year, responding to...
A year? Whoa.
Until she had the words and understanding to say, I'm afraid of the cars. And we worked out that because the cars are so loud, when they drive past loudly, and motorbikes, she thought they were going to come into the bedroom. And now that she's 3 3/4, she completely understands that cars are loud, but we are 26 floors from the ground, and there's no way they're going to come in the window. Even if they flew off the highway, they would not even be anywhere close to us. And she sleeps.
But she needed to be able to get that perspective, and you couldn't get the perspective until she was old enough to understand.
Just developmental.
There's just no shortcut, is there?
No. And nothing I did. I've got a Himalayan salt lamp for ambiance, and we've tried white noise, and we've tried fans, and we've got blockout curtains, and we've got all of the tricks of the trade. We turn the lights off an hour before bedtime. We had bath. We've got... There was nothing that we could have done to get her past her fear of the cars coming into the bedroom until she had the understanding that the cars were not going to come into the bedroom.
Just good old time.
Good old time. And it eventually, it got better and worse over that time, swings and roundabouts. She'd have a leap. She'd have a particularly bad patch of sleep, and then all of a sudden she'd speak in long sentences, or she'd tell a joke, or, she started obsessing about being able to write numbers just overnight at the dinner table. She just sat there and I need to be able to write a 4. It's just like this intense need for her. And so I think that's why the shoulds became a don't listen thing, because for all other people that I spoke to, their kids weren't afraid of the bedroom, or the way they got out over it was just to keep them in the bedroom until they found a way to fall asleep, exhausted, crying. And I just couldn't do that, because I knew that fear is not something you get over by forcing them to stay. And so I just had to take her lead.
And it's that trust again. Like she had her reason why she was feeling that way, and she was doing the best her little 2-year-old self could do. And she needed you to believe her for what she was feeling. And then when she was able to process it, she came out the other side. And do you think, I know for me as a parent, I've found you feel like you're living in a time warp, and it's something that can feel like it's going on forever, and then it's over in the blink of an eye at the same time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it really is just this thing that happened in the past.
Yeah.
And it's a very...
And I woke up rested, and I said to my husband, what happened? I don't understand what changed. Gradually she would wake up less because her body was getting used to falling back asleep, tired, without needing me. And because she wasn't waking up so much, she wasn't afraid when she woke up of where she was, because she wasn't actually waking up as much. And it did get better over time. And then all of a sudden she just slept. And now she's 3.75 years old, 3.75. And she gets tired and she says, can we go to bed? And we go to bed and she falls asleep. And we're still nursing, so she boobs to sleep. But
well done, you. I love it.
That's another thing. Like, there's no way to gently stop that for her. She's not the kind of person that we can negotiate a lot, but when she needs comfort, she needs comfort. And for me, being able to provide that comfort for a very busy brain that notices a lot, she's very sensitive. She's a bit of an anxious soul because she understands a lot. She's had a bit of loss recently, and the words she uses around that and how she explains it and the depth of her understanding is incredible, talking to her about that. So
wise.
I know she's a wise kid, and she notices more than other people sometimes do, more than I even do sometimes. She'll point out things to me that I haven't noticed. And so I can tell that when she's feeling overwhelmed, she needs comfort. And when she needs comfort, there's one thing that just quickly and easily does the trick. And so for the both of us, listening to her, acknowledging my limits too, because if she's overwhelmed, I'm generally overwhelmed and I find it difficult to calm myself. So boob works for both of us. It releases, happy hormones for me, happy hormones for her. It gets us both into a calm and restful state. And around about 2, I realised that she's talking, she's running around, she's not resting. She dropped her nap at 2.5, and so it was like this blissful break in the day where there was no nap time. There was time.
Enforced rest.
Yes.
For both of you.
It was beautiful and still is. And yesterday when she was exhausted after the hike and having meltdowns about things she really wouldn't normally melt down about on the way home, we got home and we quietened the apartment and she had some booby and she was off to sleep at 6:30, which is just not her.
Just a little bit of booby magic at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to acknowledge that too when they're like, it's so, for me, like, I finished up a bit earlier with each of my babies, and by the time we were done, we were done. But for the time that it worked as a tool, it's like a magical superpower you have up your sleeve. And I remember when they go through stages of not feeding to sleep, it was very much like that, oh my gosh, this is so much harder work.
It is. There's all these strategies, and somehow that's become something that we're taught is almost preferred, but it's more work, and I think for me, that first moment where I realised that it wasn't working for her and it wasn't working for me, trying to put her in the crib, and then it stopped working at all, putting her down. And so having her next to me, and we've been bed sharing since, and it's so easy. We just get the most sleep that we get and that we can get, and it works for all of us. And there's no fear and there's no putting them back to bed constantly through the night. And if she needs something, I'm there. And it just works for us, especially, in stressful times. We've been through 2 quarantines, one in Australia and one here in a, small apartment with a, 3-year-old, trying to fill her days and acknowledge the fear that comes from walking around and all of a sudden everyone's wearing masks for at the time 2.5-year-old to now. We've gotten through all of that by connecting and discussing, and if ever she's overwhelmed, she knows she has a touchstone. And so it's really been something for us that's worked. And now she's starting to say no thank you.
There you
when
go.
she's overwhelmed and, having a moment, and I'll say, do you want to sit down and have some booby? And she'll say, no, thank you, I'm fine.
That's so great.
Oh, great.
Yeah, like she's growing up, and meanwhile, mummy's heart's a little bit broken as well. So tell me, I meant to ask. So you said earlier that your partner, being a pilot, he's away quite often. Have you had like times when you've been away from your daughter, or like can other people settle her, or how has that looked as she's gotten older? Has it been you've been number one?
Yeah, I'm number one. And, hubby, as I said, she's very sensitive and very aware. And so the idea that hubby can and has left for periods of time has sort of made it so that I've always been the constant. And her preference is to always have both of us there.
Good on her. I'd agree with that too.
And when he's not available, then mummy's there. But, and I work from home, so I'm here all the time. And she hadn't really left my side for a long time. And then we started school during COVID, kindergarten, but it's sort of part of the school system here. So, I had this overwhelming feeling that she just would not survive or integrate without a horrible time. And I decided we would do it the way we've done everything, and I would listen to her and acknowledge her needs and respect if she said no. And so we did that with the idea that it might take weeks or months before she could enter school to teachers she hadn't really seen or been around before, wearing masks, with me unable to walk her through the doors. And it took 3 days.
Wow.
The first day she was locked into my chest. She wouldn't even bring her head off my chest to look around. The second day she looked around and engaged with her teachers, which she'd seen on online Zoom meetings before. And they kept saying, oh, it sort of works best if we just take them and they cry for a bit and then they settle. And I said, that's not who my daughter is. We're not going to do that. Thanks.
You're good. Thanks. Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
And so they said, look, would it help if she came in when the other kids weren't here and we had like a 10-minute just play in the room, in the schoolroom, with you there? And we did that the next day. And then the day after that, she walked in happily.
How great that they could be flexible though, and like accept that for transition for her, she just needed to be able to have some quiet space. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and we're very incredibly, insanely privileged that we can afford the kind of school that does have that flexibility, because that doesn't exist as much in the public school system here. There's a lot of parents that work full-time 6 days a week, and, it's a different environment. I've been very privileged that I can work part-time and work around my daughter's needs this whole time, and my husband can go and come back and support when he needs to. And, we have and acknowledge the intense privilege we have to be able to choose a school that can work with our needs and does have that availability, because a lot can't, and a lot of people can't work flexibly and have to work full-time hours or more than one job, and when they return to work, there's not wiggle room where they can spend a week integrating, and that's another privilege that we've had, that we were able to take when she said no and go home and talk to her about how she felt about it, and then try again another day. We had the time to do that. But for me, I think if I could go back and tell myself the me that was doing things differently, and the constant questions that come up when things don't go well, that you think, oh God, have I done this the wrong way? Have I ruined everything? Have I made her think that it's her choice for everything, and so she will never accept, wiggle room for anything? All of those times where you think, oh no, have I done it all wrong? It would be lovely to be able to go back to yourself that was struggling and worried about being too attentive or too responsive or too gentle, that actually now she's almost 4 and she happily asks to go to bed when she's tired, and she's excited to go to school, and she can say that, she misses me and that she loves me, but she has a good time with her friends at school. And
A beautiful example of a really secure base. She feels safe and secure to go and explore. She knows that she's safe and that you've got her back. Well, I won't keep you for too much longer too. I'm just mindful of time for the end of the episode, but I thought I've got 2 quick things to finish this up, if that's okay. So first of all, I've got to get your tip of the week for this week's episode. What would your tip be this time?
My tip would be if you think your baby is trying to tell you something and you have a lot of people telling you that it couldn't possibly be that, listen to yourself, listen to your instincts. I think for me, being able to listen to my child came from the development of being able to listen to myself and what my body was telling me about what her body was telling me. And since, her being able to verbalize more, looking back, I can see exactly what she was going through and exactly how she was feeling. And I think so often we're told that it's just comfort and just this and shouldn't need this and should need that. But you can feel it in your body when your child needs something and they're not getting it. And so often we are told to ignore those instincts because children need this and kids at this age should be able to. But I think I've come to the realization that later, when they can use words, usually they'll tell you that those feelings were right all along.
Yeah, we've had many of those ones too with all 3 of ours. As they've got words, it's kind of like, oh yeah, and that, like, the penny drops and it's something that's been going on for quite a while, all suddenly makes sense because they can actually explain it to you. And so, yeah, once again, it sounds so much of this comes back to trust in the relationship and trusting the connection you have with your child and that bit of self-confidence to know that you can trust yourself as well. But that's a really wise bit of advice. Thank you for that one. And just to finish off our episode, because it's been so fabulous having you on, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing what your most precious memory would be from nurturing your baby.
For me, I think it was that moment in hospital when the lactation consultant said, it's okay, you don't have to wake her up. You can just put her on your chest and she will wake and feed when she needs. And that was like being given permission to mother my child. And until that point, I had felt very out of sorts and like I needed permission to pick her up. I had to pick her up in a certain way and take her over there in a certain way and sit in a certain way. And there were all these rules and she just sort of gave me permission to be a mum.
I love it. And it's like it's so imprinted, obviously, for your memory of that time. And what a fantastic way to start off motherhood. Even though there was lots of tough things ahead, it's so great that you had someone right in those early days to be able to say, you can do this. Yeah. You've got it. That's brilliant.
Yeah. All she needs to do.
Yeah, that's all she needs from you. That's so good. All right, well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom, Elise, and thank you so much for being one of our fabulous volunteers. We love you very much for it. And if you aren't already a member of the group, please do come and join the Beyond Sleep Training group on Facebook. You can, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, and this is the first episode you're catching, please make sure you click the subscribe button. We'd love to have you. And looking forward to getting many more stories coming across your platforms soon. So thank you so much, Elise.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. I really hope you enjoyed the podcast today. The information we discussed was just that, information only. It is not specific advice. If you take any action following something you've heard from our show today, it is important to make sure you get professional advice about your unique situation before you proceed, whether that advice be legal, financial, accounting, medical, or any other advice. Please reach out to me if you do have any questions or if there's a topic you'd really like us to be covering. And if you know somebody who'd really benefit from listening to our podcast, please be sure to pass our name along. Also, check out our free peer support group, the Beyond Sleep Training Project, and our wonderful website, www.littlesparklers.org. If you'd like even more from the show, you can join us as a patron on Patreon, and you can find a link for that in our show notes. If listening's not really your jam, we also make sure we put full episode transcripts on our Little Sparklers website for you to also enjoy, and fully captioned YouTube videos as well on our Little Sparklers channel. So thanks again for listening today. We really enjoy bringing this podcast